The Schlieffen Plan. I should probably play music and other fanfare. This is one of the most discussed parts of World War One, and everyone talks about the great failure of the Schlieffen Plan and everything else. So really, what is it? And so we'll go through a little more specifically what we're talking about. Schlieffen becomes the chief of the general staff. He becomes this general in charge and understands some basic things about the situation Germany is in. In any case of a continental war, and thanks to a new system of alliances, any number of conflicts could easily start out or become a large continental war. And so what he wants to do is avoid that key situation we talked about in the last presentation, which is the German sandwich, especially the German sandwich. And also, if in case of any hostility from Austria-Hungary, you have Germany bounded on three sides by potential hostiles, 1, 2, and 3. So, the Austro-Hungarian alliance with Germany helps to erase some of that. But what Schlieffen has is a problem. He knows that he can't outmatch France totally. That France doesn't have the same population as Germany. It's close. France has about 40 million. Germany has about 50 million. But he's going to have issues. The other problem that we're going to find is that he also knows that France and Russia, of course, are close. And that with that problem, Russia far outpopulates Germany. And in any war where these two countries are involved, now that there's no longer the reinsurance agreement, that Germany would have to fight a two-front war. Germany needs to avoid a two-front war. So the question is, what to do or what to do? So, other problems that Germany has to face. This boundary here, or this border here, of the French frontier between France and Germany, has been reinforced with a number of forts, strong forts that are well defended. And these strong forts on the border make France, a real tough victory for Germany, because crossing over or getting through those forts, penetrating them, would be difficult. Germany's done the same here and built forts in this territory of Alsace-Lorraine that it had taken from France in the Franco-Prussian War. So before Schlieffen even makes a plan, his predecessor, von Moltke Sr., the elder, realizes that, I can't attack France through that fortress line. And I can't violate Belgian neutrality, because that would ruin my whole foreign policy, right? It would invite participation from England and from Russia and from everyone else guaranteeing Belgian neutrality. So, I can't attack France. So my best solution is to be defensive and defend along this frontier and back to the Rhine River if necessary. And there, if we have to go to war with Russia, the same thing is you draw a defensive perimeter, defensive boundary on the frontier. And von Moltke the Elder also used to change his plans pretty regularly according to diplomacy. In other words, one of the things that we said sort of breaks down between 1900 and 1914 is that military does its thing, diplomats do their thing, and they don't have much of a go-between or much coordination. One of the things he did was coordinate. So this coordination, it was important. So this is sort of the genesis of the Schlieffen Plan, even though Schlieffen's not in power yet, doesn't write it. So Germany still has a problem, and that's called the Two-Front War, and it's defensive. So still, the German can defend, but could be pushed back further and crushed that way. So when Schlieffen comes to, takes office and comes to head the general staff, Schlieffen wasn't necessarily a student of diplomacy and foreign policy. What he believed in was force, and force was the primary thing. So when the reinsurance treaty with Russia was repudiated in 1890, and Schlieffen's in charge, right, it brings up some more problems for Germany. France was weaker, but those forts are still a problem. Russia was weaker than Germany, but it has something else. If you're going to take the capital, that's St. Petersburg at that time, or you're going to really penetrate and attack the Russians, look at all of this space. Germany would have to go from the frontier out all the way to here. These are long marches. They take a long time. And as Napoleon found out, Russians' General Winter, in other words, they often refer to General Winter, meaning the rough Russian winter, is not good on an attacking army. Russia was weaker, but it had a lot of space. So the time it took for you to mobilize and get through that space could buy Russia time to draw a defensive perimeter effectively, counterpunching you and allowing Mother Nature to also be a strong defender of Mother Russia. Austria-Hungary is an ally, but it's also weak. But it's hostile to Russia, so it could be a friend. So the question is, how do I outpower or overpower the French forts? Well, by this point, Germany did have a solution, and it was called the Big Bertha. Now, one possible solution called the Big Bertha. The Big Bertha is the largest land cannon or artillery piece ever developed. It was as big or maybe even bigger than a naval cannon. And in Belgium, we'll see, it blew apart fortress walls. It cracked them like eggs. The problem, it wasn't going to do much to the French forts, and there was too many of them, and they're too well defended. So the problem is it's too much effort, it's too much risk, and it's too much to overcome to attack the French forts head on. So how do you avoid the French forts? Well, you have to do that one thing that other predecessors were unwilling to do, is that you violate Belgian neutrality. And you don't just do a little bit, you do a lot of it. So Germany would march the bulk of its army through Belgium this way, and they would split. Once they got to a position of about here, right on the Belgian border, sorry, too many dots. Once they got to sort of this Belgian border, what would happen is this part of the army would wheel around to Paris. This part of the army would go here. And while the bulk of the army, about 2/3 of it, would be here, about 1/3 would be on the French frontier, pretending to attack this way. So, why would this be successful in overcoming the French forts on the frontier now? Because what happened is that the bulk of the German army has wheeled around Paris, threatening it and closing it off. And what this is called is a flanking maneuver that would attack the French army from behind, catching it between three points of force: here, here, and here. The idea was to do it so rapidly that that France would capitulate, because they also believed that at the same time there would be a war with Russia, but Russia would take a while to mobilize. So 2/3 of the German army is supposed to march through Belgium. Participate in this wheeling movement around Paris. Okay, and it's all according to timetables. So timetables are important. So okay, so bear with me here. I made my line thicknesses a little thinner to help draw this out. So Germany's plan is to really violate the sovereignty of Belgium a lot. And so they're going to move as many as they can into Belgium and line up on this border. And they should be at this border here, the Belgian-French border, by a special date. So one of the ways that they calculate mobilization dates or use a term to describe them is after the day of mobilization. They're often calculating according to how many days it takes. And this would be called M plus 22. So 22 days after mobilization, the German armies should be at the Belgian border. So according to the Schlieffen Plan, okay, their German armies need to reach the French-Belgian border by M plus 22. Okay? By M plus 31, they should be in a line about here. Okay? And that line should be at the Somme and Meuse rivers. And it's from there that you have the wheeling movement. And then you have, this was always supposed to be part of the plan in there, and then the move there. So that way, this French army is caught between these 3 points. The idea is to lure them out, to encircle them, and smash them. So when do they plan on complete victory? According to the Schlieffen Plan, complete victory over the French army by M plus 42. So within 42 days of mobilization, the Schlieffen Plan called for a victory against the French. Why? What was it trying to do? Schlieffen needs to plan against a two-front war, but knows that the minute he attacks France, he's got a two-front war. Russia will come to its aid. The belief is, okay, that it could use, if it smashed France within 42 days, it would take out one front. This whole Western Front would be done. And it would use newly built railroads to effectively move German soldiers to the eastern border to take on the Russians. Why would you do it in this way? Because the feeling was, while the Russians could mobilize lots of soldiers, those soldiers have to come from all over Russia, right? And because of that, it would take them a long time to mobilize. And then, if they were going to attack, they had to move over a long distance to attack. That would mean the Russians would take a long time to move. And because of this, Germany would have some time to try to take out France first and then deal with the Russians. So, Schlieffen was a believer in what they call pure generalship. He wasn't a fan of politics. He wasn't a fan of logistics. He wasn't very interested in troop psychology, any of that stuff. He believed in generals who were commanding things. He would tinker with the plan through the 1890s into the early 1900s. And at one point, as I mentioned, he was always scared of increasing the size of the army because of what he feared was corruption. But what we're going to learn here is that these countries from between 1900 and 1914 have been drafting large armies and continually drafting more reservists. So, What does that mean? You want to put as much force on target as possible, right? However, the problem Germany has is that in this aspect of the Schlieffen Plan, which most people think this is the Schlieffen Plan here, the whole thing is the Schlieffen Plan, but the French aspect, the French-Belgian aspect is, if we were to example, excuse me, drawing in the ocean here, but I'm going to. So I'm drawing a funnel badly, right? And if this is a funnel and this is a bottle, right? Like a bottle lid. Okay, so we've got our funnel and a bottle lid. Let's say that this bottle can technically hold, 50 gallons, but its neck is very thin and its mouth is very thin. So I have to use this funnel to neatly pour 50 gallons of liquid into the 50-gallon bottle. It's a huge bottle. Now, how quickly I can pour that 50 gallons is dictated by this opening, right? The mouth of the bottle and the width of the funnel. So I could pour 50 gallons and try to hurry it in as much as I want. It doesn't matter. I could say, well, I'm going to fill this bottle up and it's going to be great because I have a full 50 gallons to fill it in. It doesn't matter. The problem I have is a problem of width or flow rate. It's the same problem of, say, a garden hose versus a fire hose. Both may be able to deliver the same amount of water if time were not a factor. But what happens here is that because the garden hose is so much thinner, it can only accommodate so much water at any given time, so the fire hose can deliver more water on target, in one shot. So, just like this funnel here limits the amount of liquid that I can put in the bottle at any given moment, right? Well, I want you to think of Belgium like a funnel, because the German army needs to march as many people, as many soldiers as it can through Belgium to wheel around, right? The problem is there are limits to how much or how many men this route can accommodate. Even if you had, let's say, an extra 20 million men to march, it doesn't mean that they could all get there in time to be effective. So your army, you need to put your forces on target at roughly the same time so that they can fight effectively as one unit. If they are not on time, it means that while you may say, let's say you're going to put 20 million men on target here. Well, the problem is, if they can't all get there to fight as a force of 20 million, and the most you can put on task at any one time is 1 million, and then you have a line of 19 million people waiting, the French might be able to put 15 million in defense here and overwhelm this army in what's called detail, destroying it piece by piece by piece by piece. So you may be numerically superior, but you never actually get to enjoy the advantages of that numerical superiority because you don't get to put them all your force to bear, or the bulk of your force to bear when it's most needed. There's not enough roads in Belgium. There's not enough railroads in Belgium, and the roads would clog up, and you have to march men. On average, they can make about 13 kilometers per day. That's great, but in some cases, you might, in order to get the effect you want, in this case, distance means speed, and time is of the essence. You have to move fast and get yourself in a position for that wheel round to be effective. If you can't do it fast enough, a number of things can happen. And so you need to keep people moving. and you need to make sure the advance doesn't clog up. But you don't have the space. So one of the weaknesses of the Schlieffen Plan is that it didn't really have the space it needed to be effective. Additionally, the other problem is the minute you violate Belgium neutrality, England might decide to land the British Expeditionary Force right here, or in Belgium here to defend it. So that would mean that the Germans have to find a way to defeat the English or the British Expeditionary Force and then move on. The problem in the Schlieffen Plan was that it never actually planned or allotted any extra time for the engagement with the British Army. So it basically was a plan that said, well, the British may get involved, and if they do, we're still planning for M+42. Not taking into account the fact that it would probably take some weeks to defeat the British Army before being able to continue the advance into Paris. So that's one weakness. The other weakness is that you need to keep your regular army, your professional battle-trained soldiers, fresh and ready to do the bulk of the fighting in these early phases. The problem is that you also have logistical issues. You need to supply your troops. You need to keep them fed. And the other thing is if you advance your troops too fast, your supply lines can't keep up, which means that you've got an army that runs out of material, it runs out of ammunition, it runs out of food. So you need to be able to, as rapidly as they advance, you need to just as rapidly provide supplies, which becomes difficult, especially with the large number of men being moved. You also need to guard railways that run these supplies. You need to overtake any siege works or fortresses, and so it's going to divert some soldiers from this advance that you're trying to put this force to bear. So these are all places where power can leak. And so we'll see what happens to the Schlieffen Plan. But these, in spite of these weaknesses, this is the plan that gets, that's on the German radar. This is what gets filed away, and the Germans are very adamant about, sticking to the plan. Why? Schlieffen had a great reputation. So, to doubt the wisdom of the Schlieffen Plan was to invite great criticism in the German system. But it's also an opening game plan. Did soldiers believe, did the commanders really believe that everything would follow according to plan perfectly? No. But having a good plan was an important part of sort of this effect, opening the war. And the idea was, once again, to stave off a long war, to stave off the devastation of a two-front war, and hoping to put as much force to bear to get the resolution you wanted. A long war, Schlieffen understood, would have been a disaster. Now, one of the problems Germany also had was that it doubted, that frontier force here, the 1/3 of the German army that's not going through Belgium. Okay, the Germans were quite So the Germans are quite concerned, okay? The Germans are quite concerned that France will not oblige them. What do I mean by that? Is that the French, they thought, wow, it would be perfect if the French put their army here and then just wanted to do what they did in the last war, the Franco-Prussian War, and attack over Germany this way. Schlieffen said, oh, France will never oblige us this way. We'll find out exactly what France was doing, but his hope is that, wishful thinking was that if France was here, this sort of plan would really work because, once again, you wheel around, right? You wheel here, and then you've got your German frontier force to engage the French and push them into this trap. So it was waiting on that. It also was hoping for a little help from its friend. So Germany would also have a small force here, and then basically willing to to fight the Russians and wait in a defensive posture while this is going on. And it was hoping for some help from Austria-Hungary. And we'll see there to also provide some help. But that is the Schlieffen Plan.